He hadn't spoken to anyone in 3 days. The house was quiet, tucked into the snow-laced hillside of Colorado, the kind of quiet that felt chosen but heavy. James Halden liked it that way. No ringing phones, no surprise visits, no one asking how he was holding up. The silence wasn't comforting, but at least it was predictable. He had hired her the same way he did most things now online, with as few questions as possible. Sam Walker, 30-something, no references, but a clean background check and a polite one-sentence reply to his offer. I'll clean. I'll keep quiet. I don't need much. She showed up in a plain hoodie and jeans, her face-drawn eyes hidden beneath the brim of a faded ball cap. She didn't look like someone who would last, too lean, too tired. But she worked with a strange kind of discipline, like cleaning was a task someone had once taught her was sacred. James noticed things without trying. The way she wiped down counters in perfect horizontal lines, the way she kept her back to the large windows, the way she always left the house before sunset. But what he noticed most after a week was the way she walked. There was a limp, subtle but real, left leg. She masked it well, but it was there. Some days it looked worse. She leaned on tables a little longer, took stairs one at a time. Still, she never complained, never winced, never asked for help. He didn't ask either. That was the agreement. She cleaned, he let her be. But on the morning it happened, something in the air shifted. Snow had fallen overnight, heavy and silent. The windows were misted. The world felt suspended. James was in the kitchen, staring into his untouched coffee, when he heard it a sound out of place. A dull thud. Then nothing. He walked down the hall, the echo of his steps, the only reply. The bathroom door was slightly open. Steam hung in the air like smoke. And then he saw her. She was on the floor, one hand braced against the tile, the other gripping the edge of the sink. Her leg was twisted awkwardly, her face-pale lips parted like she was gasping through a memory. But what froze him was not the fall. It was what he saw beneath her slipping shirt. A long scar, pale against her back, jagged not from surgery, but from something rougher. Below it, a dark ink tattoo, half-hidden coordinates, military. And just beneath her shoulder blade, the shiny, warped patch of skin that could only come from fire. He stopped breathing. Sam looked up. Her eyes locked on his, not with shame, not with pain, but with terror. She scrambled to pull the shirt down, but her body gave out. Her hand trembled. Her breath came fast and shallow. She wasn't here anymore. She wasn't in his bathroom. She was somewhere else, somewhere far worse. James dropped to his knees, but not too close. He didn't touch her. He didn't speak. She was shaking, staring through him. Then her voice, hoarse and distant. Don't. Not yet. He stayed where he was. It wasn't the blood on her knee or the bruises on her arm that stopped him from moving. It was that look, the one that said she had seen more than anyone ever should. That was the moment everything shifted, not because of what he had seen, but because of what he hadn't asked until now. James Halden had not always lived in the mountains. Before the silence, before the glass house, tucked into pine and snow, before the air that tasted like cold steel and coffee gone stale, he had lived in the noise, Manhattan mostly. Tech conferences, keynote speeches, a suite in a building with too many buttons in the elevator. He had money more than he could ever use and a wife who used to remind him to slow down. Then she got sick, and the world turned quiet all at once. After she passed, James disappeared. He bought the property online, Sight unseen, just a few clicks and a signature. 3 hours from Denver, no neighbors in earshot. The walls were tall and wide, mostly glass, letting the landscape pour into every room. He installed smart systems, voice-activated everything, so he wouldn't need anyone. The house listened when people no longer did. For a while, that was enough. Then came the mess, not in the physical sense. James kept things clean, clinically so. But grief is a different kind of dust. It clings to corners the vacuum never reaches. That's why he posted the ad, not for a housekeeper, not really, for something else he couldn't name. She answered simply, "No long paragraphs, just a line I can clean. I don't take up space." That was 3 weeks ago. Sam Walker arrived with one small bag, a slight limp, and no questions. She didn't look like the applicants he had ignored. There was something guarded about her, like she'd spent time around people who could not be trusted with softness. She was polite but distant. She moved through the house like someone who had memorized the layout without looking. Always early, always precise. She wore the same black hoodie sleeves pulled low collar high. Her hair was usually tucked under a cap. When she spoke, it was barely above a whisper and never about herself. James learned not to ask. She cleaned in silence, humming sometimes just under her breath. Songs without words, military cadences maybe, though he wasn't sure. Once he caught a glimpse of her ID tag left on the counter by mistake. It was dog-eared plastic, peeling at the edges. Samantha Walker, U.S. Army, no rank listed, no expiration. He didn't mention it, just placed it beside her mug and turned away. She never acknowledged it. The limp became more noticeable around day 10. Some mornings she favored the left leg so much it was like her foot refused the floor. But she worked through it, jaw set back straight. She used the broom handle for balance when she thought he wasn't looking. James noticed. He always noticed. Not just the limp, but the way she kept her eyes off mirrors. The way she flinched at loud noises. The way she avoided the master bedroom entirely, even though he never asked her to. His wife's room still untouched, still frozen in the version she left behind. Sam never stepped across the threshold. Some people know where the ghosts live. On snowy days like today, the house felt like it had stopped aging. Time pooled in the corners, thick and heavy. James spent most mornings with his back to the windows, pretending the view didn't feel like a painting of someone else's life. He didn't talk much, not anymore. Words felt wasteful, unnecessary. But when Sam was in the room, he listened. To the way her steps paused before the stairs, to the breath she held when she leaned over too far, to the silence that said more than any resume could. He didn't need to know what happened to her. He could guess. War had a sound. And she moved like someone who still heard it even here, even now. The house wasn't a home, not yet. It was a place where things sat still. But she brought something into it. Not warmth, not exactly. More like proof that movement still mattered, that broken things could still function. And then she fell, and he saw the scars and the story she had buried under layers of fabric and silence, screamed without a word. James didn't know then that everything would change, only that the world had shifted and neither of them could pretend anymore. After the fall, she didn't speak to him for 2 days. She continued cleaning as usual, same routines, same silences, but her presence was sharper now, more guarded, like she was waiting for him to bring it up. But James didn't. He didn't ask her about the scars or the limp or the way her breathing had spiraled. into something panicked as she lay on the floor. He simply offered her coffee. In the mornings, sat a little longer in the kitchen and left the bathroom door open whenever he knew she was near, as if to say, "I'm not hiding either." On the third morning, she found him on the back deck, sitting with a mug and wrapped in a wool blanket. Snow still covered most of the yard, crusted over. From the night frost, the trees stiff with cold. She stepped out slower than usual, holding her own cup with both hands. Her leg moved stiffly, the limp more pronounced today. She said nothing as she lowered herself into the chair across from him. He glanced over, but didn't stare. The air between them held weight, but not pressure. For a while they just listened to the wind move through pine. He spoke first. Not about what happened, not directly. He told her about the storm 2 winters ago, how it knocked out power for 5 days, and how he had to survive by cooking on a grill in the garage. She chuckled under her breath, the first sound he had heard from her that wasn't a sigh or a whisper. "You should have used your fireplace," she said. "I don't know how to build one," he replied. She smiled faintly. "You should learn." The next day he found her sitting on the floor of the living room, with a fire already going. She was poking at the logs with practiced ease, heat dancing in her eyes. When he asked how she learned, she shrugged. "Deployment," she said. "Iraq, then Afghanistan. You get used to improvising." That night he didn't sleep well. Not because of what she had said, but because of how casually she said it, like those places were just bus stops she'd passed through. The next week passed in quiet rhythm. She moved slower but still worked. He began adjusting his routines to match hers. He cooked more. Small meals at first, mostly soup and grilled sandwiches, but he started making enough for 2. At first she declined. Then she began eating while standing. Eventually, she sat at the counter beside him. They didn't say much, but the air shifted. One evening, after a particularly cold day, she returned from the market walking slower than usual. James opened the door for her, noticed her grip on the banister as she stepped in. She had pushed herself too far. He took her bag. She didn't fight him, just sank into the armchair like her bones had given up. He crouched beside her, held out her leg gently. "May I?" he asked. She nodded just once. He removed her boot slowly, careful not to pull too fast. Her sock was damp with sweat, and beneath it her ankle was swollen red, pulsing. He placed it on a cushion, wrapped it in a towel with ice. She closed her eyes and leaned back. "I used to be good at hiding it," she said softly. "You still are," he replied. She laughed bitterly. "Doesn't seem like it." He sat on the floor beside her, hands on his knees. "You're strong, Sam." She shook her head. "You don't know me." "Then tell me," he said. She was quiet a long time. Then finally, without looking at him, she spoke. "I joined the army at 22. Wanted to escape my town. Thought the uniform would fix me. It didn't, but it gave me purpose. Until the last tour. We hit an IED. My best friend bled out on my lap. My back caught fire from the shrapnel. I didn't walk for 6 months. And after that, nothing was the same. I came home to nothing. My mother had passed. My boyfriend left. The VA gave me pills and pamphlets. She looked at him then. You're not the only one who knows how to disappear. He didn't speak. Just let the words settle into the space between them. That night she didn't retreat to her room early, like usual. They sat by the fire, both wrapped in blankets, watching the flames rise and fall. She leaned her head back, stared at the ceiling like it held answers. You ever lose someone in a way that made you forget how to breathe?" she asked. He nodded. "My wife. Cancer. Fast. She refused treatment in the end. Said she wanted her last memory to be of music, not medicine." He paused. "I still play the playlist she made sometimes." Sam was quiet. Then she asked, "You have her stuff?" "Her room's still there," he said. "Haven't changed a thing." "You ever go in?" "Not since the funeral." She nodded slowly, then said, "Maybe you should." 2 days later he did. The room smelled faintly of lavender, dust on the windowsills. He didn't touch much, just stood in the center, letting it wrap around him. When he returned to the kitchen, Sam was making tea. She didn't ask what he saw. She just handed him a cup and said, "Welcome back." From that day on, they began to shift, slowly. She started playing music while cleaning. He opened the blinds more. She laughed more freely. He asked more questions. One evening, while watching an old movie, she reached over and rested her hand on his. It was light, unsure, but steady. He didn't move, just let it be. The touch was not a declaration. It was a truce, a promise. Not yet love, but the beginning of trust. And for them, that was more sacred than anything else. Spring came slowly in the mountains. Snow turned to slush, trees pushed out hesitant green, and the mornings began to smell like wet soil instead of frost. Sam moved easier now. The limp remained, but she no longer tried to hide it. She walked like someone who had accepted that healing was not about going back to how things were, but learning to live with what stayed broken. James noticed the change. It was in her posture, the way she looked him in the eye without fear, the way she stayed in the same room longer than she used to. Some days she even smiled first. He asked fewer questions. Now, not because he wasn't curious, but because he knew her answers would come when she was ready. One morning she handed him a small box, plain wood edges worn. "I need you to see it," she said. Inside were medals, a purple heart, a bronze star, a folded American flag neatly creased. Beneath that, a photo, 6 soldiers, dusty, sweaty, alive. Sam was in the middle, grinning her arm around a tall woman with a crooked smile. She tapped the photo. "That's Taylor, my best friend. We called her Tails." She bled out in my lap. Her voice didn't waver, but James saw the way her jaw clenched. I held her hand and told her she'd be okay. I lied. The explosion came from the side road. We were supposed to be off patrol, just driving back to base. They planted it in a dead goat carcass. Clever. Sick. We didn't even see it coming. The first blast flipped us. I woke up screaming. My skin was on fire, my back, my leg. She didn't make it. Neither did our driver. James sat across from her, holding the photo gently. "You were the only survivor?" he asked. Sam nodded. "Physically, yeah. Mentally, I didn't come back for a year, maybe more. They sent me to Germany for rehab, then back here. I thought I could find my footing again. I applied for jobs, tried to teach, tried to be normal, but I couldn't stand crowds, couldn't sleep without pills, couldn't ride in cars without checking under the hood for wires. I lost it a few times, cursed out a manager for slamming a door, woke up screaming in a homeless shelter. The system is built for wounds you can see. I stopped trying, found a few cleaning jobs through friends. Then I saw your ad. You said no references required. That mattered." James looked at her long and quiet. "Thank you for telling me," he said. She gave a tired smile. "You didn't ask. That mattered too." Later that week, she had a bad night. It started with thunder. The sky cracked open in the early hours, and he heard her scream from down the hall. He ran to her room. She was crouched in the corner, breathing hard, eyes wide, skin pale. Her hands were over her ears, rocking slowly. He didn't touch her, just sat nearby, speaking softly. "You're safe. It's just a storm. You're home. It's over." He repeated it until she began to shake less. Her hands dropped from her ears. Her breathing slowed. She looked at him like she was waking up from something deep and violent. He offered his hand. She took it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Don't be." That night she stayed on the couch. He made tea, played soft music, and left the lights on. Neither of them slept, but they made it through. The next morning she made pancakes, burned the first batch, laughed when he grimaced. "Progress," she said. James started taking walks with her in the afternoon, short ones at first, then longer. They'd talk about everything and nothing. Movies, music, the absurdity of tech billionaires, the quiet politics of grief. She told him about the letters she used to write to soldiers overseas long before she joined the army. How she had never traveled anywhere before boot camp. How she missed the heat of the desert and the smell of gun oil more than she missed any house she'd ever lived in. He told her about building his first app in college, the way it exploded overnight. How he missed coding sometimes, the quiet of logic, the clean right or wrong of it. How he hadn't touched a line of code since his wife got sick. She asked why. "Because nothing made sense after that," he said. She nodded. "That tracks." One evening he handed her a leather-bound journal. "I figured maybe you'd want to write it down." She flipped through the empty pages. "I haven't written since the hospital. Might be time," he said. She began that night, a few lines at first, then pages. He never asked to read it. She never offered. But he saw the difference. Her eyes less heavy, her shoulders less tense. Sometimes healing was just telling the truth without needing to explain it. And she was beginning to find the words again. That winter she told him she wanted to stay longer. Maybe through spring, maybe more. James didn't hide the relief in his voice. "This house is better with you in it," he said. She smiled, tired but real. "I think I'm better in it too." The past still lived in her bones. The limp would never fully go. The flashbacks might still visit. But she was no longer running. And for the first time in years, neither was he. The first sign that something had shifted came on a Friday morning. The air was sharp and clear, spring sun slipping through the windows in gold streaks. Sam was making coffee, her gait slow but steady, humming a familiar melody under her breath. One James had learned came from her early deployments. He was sitting at the kitchen island reading the news from a tablet he rarely used. Then the knock came. Not the friendly kind, not the confused neighbor or lost hiker. This was 3 firm pounds, deliberate and heavy. The sound of someone who knew they were being heard. Sam froze mid-step, the mug halfway to her lips. James stood, walked to the front door, and looked through the side panel. A man stood there, early 50s, clean-shaven, tall, with a posture too straight to be casual. He wore a black jacket, mirrored sunglasses, and held an envelope in one hand. James opened the door, slowly, not stepping out. "Can I help you?" he asked. The man removed his glasses, looked past James into the house, then back at him. "I'm looking for Samantha Walker." James didn't answer. The man raised the envelope. "This is legal business, former military records. Some inquiries were made." She left some paperwork unfinished. James stepped outside and closed the door behind him. "She doesn't want to be found," he said. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Doesn't matter what she wants. Some of us still answer to the system." He handed James the envelope and walked away without another word. No threats, no raised voice. Just the message we know. James stood on the porch a long moment before going back inside. Sam hadn't moved. Her hands trembled just slightly, but her face was calm in that way that only someone deeply trained could manage. She looked at the envelope in his hand. "You opened it?" she asked. "Not yet." She nodded. "You should." He set it on the table, broke the seal, and unfolded the letter. It was short, formal, a government inquiry from a private military contractor, seeking to verify her medical history, citing inconsistencies in her discharge file. They weren't asking her to come back, but they were trying to discredit her claim of trauma, of injury, of a pension. She'd stopped receiving 6 months earlier. "This isn't about paperwork," James said. "This is about punishment." She nodded again. "They think I ran. Or worse, that I lied. They want to clear the books, make it look like I failed them." She turned away from the table. "I didn't tell you everything. I was supposed to testify against a commanding officer. He was running unauthorized missions, selling supplies, using female medics as couriers without their knowledge. When I got injured, I refused to sign his version of the report. Next thing I know, my file goes missing. My injury becomes an accident instead of an explosion. I lose benefits, I lose credibility, I vanish." James sat down slowly. "Why didn't you tell someone?" "I tried, but when you're a woman and a soldier and broken all at once, your voice is the first thing they take. They told me I could take the settlement or go quiet. I chose neither. I left." James was quiet for a long moment, then finally said, "You're not going to fight this alone?" She looked at him, her face unreadable. "I can't pull you into this. It's not safe." "I've lived in silence too long," James replied. "This isn't about risk. It's about truth." That night he made calls, quiet ones. A friend from law school who now worked with veteran affairs. A woman he once backed in a nonprofit helping whistleblowers. By morning he had 3 names, 2 numbers, and 1 promise. They would help her. The following week was a blur. Sam traveled to Denver twice, accompanied by James to meet with an advocate who specialized in disputed military claims. The paperwork was dense, the details painful. She had to retell the story over and over, signing affidavits, revisiting hospital records, naming the man who tried to bury her file. Each time she spoke, her voice grew steadier. Each time she remembered, she reclaimed a piece of what was taken. James stayed beside her for every meeting, drove every mile, waited outside every room where they told her she could not bring emotional support. He was there when she exited pale and trembling, and there when she smiled after hearing her file had been reopened. There was a moment in the parking lot, the sun warm on the hood of the car, where she turned to him and asked, "Why are you doing this?" His answer was simple. "Because I didn't save her. I couldn't save my wife, but I can show up now, and I choose to." That evening, back at the house, she pulled an old shoebox from her room. Inside were letters, some written by her, some written to her, many unread. She handed him one. "Taylor wrote this before she died. I've never opened it. Will you read it with me?" He sat beside her on the floor. She unfolded the page. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. It was a letter of hope, of forgiveness, of gratitude. A final message from someone who knew the end was coming and still chose love. Sam cried then. Quiet tears, no sobs, no gasps, just release. James held her hand, no words, no fixing, just presence. That night, they didn't sleep apart, not in the way that mattered. They lay side by side, not out of desire, but out of trust. And for the first time, both of them dreamed without waking in fear. The next morning, she asked if he wanted to hear her whole story. Not just the military, not just the injury, everything. He said yes, and she began. Her childhood, the girl she used to be, the dreams she once had, the years she lost, and the years she survived. She gave him all of it, and in return he gave her what he had left, his grief, his failures, his love, not spoken but shown, not sudden but real. Two broken people choosing to be whole together. The storm was not over. The inquiry was still open. The past was not erased, but something fundamental had changed. They were no longer waiting to be saved. They were saving themselves. Together. The day the letter arrived, the sky was soft and gray. Clouds moved slow, casting the house in a kind of muted calm that made everything feel a little closer, a little quieter. James found the envelope wedged into the mailbox, no return address, government. Sealed thick with weight. He didn't open it right away. He carried it inside like a stone and set it on the kitchen table where Sam could see it. She looked at it but said nothing. Her hands were still wet from the dishes, steam rising from the sink. He slid it toward her slowly. She dried her hands, sat down, and stared at it for a while, as if she could hear the words through the paper. Then she opened it, slowly with care, like someone unwrapping something sacred or dangerous. The letter was short, too short. A decision had been made. Her case had been reviewed. Her original medical discharge was being reclassified. Benefits would be reinstated, her record restored. But the man she named the one she testified against had not been charged. Lack of evidence, they said. He had resigned with honors, no further action. She read it twice, then again. Her hands didn't shake, her eyes didn't well. But her voice, when she finally spoke, was like paper tearing. They gave me justice on paper, not in truth. James said nothing. He knew this tone. It wasn't anger. It was a silence that came after all the screaming had gone quiet. She folded the letter neatly, placed it back in the envelope, and set it aside. They don't want to fight, she said. They want this to disappear, and they think a pension is enough to silence me. But I am not disappearing, not again. That night she didn't go to bed. She sat at the dining table with her journal open, a mug of cold tea beside her, and began to write. Not to remember, not to report, but to speak. She wrote for hours, pages filled with names, dates, pain, but also moments of light, laughter in bunkers, shared rations. The last time Taylor smiled, she wrote until her fingers cramped. James woke at dawn and found her still writing. He didn't interrupt. He just made fresh coffee and sat beside her. She looked at him and said, "I need to go back. Not to the army, to the place where it happened." James didn't ask why. He just nodded. They drove 2 days later, 6 hours south, to a small town near an old base that had since been decommissioned. Sam had called ahead to a non-profit there, one that helped female veterans reconnect with their units. The woman who ran it greeted her at the gate like an old friend. Not because they had met, but because they had both survived. The building was simple brick and glass filled with light and stories. Sam led a talk the next day. She stood before a room of strangers and told her story. She didn't cry. She didn't pause. Her voice held steady, like it had been waiting for this. When she finished, the room was silent. Then one woman stood, then another. Soon, Sam was surrounded by nods, by hands, by stories that echoed hers. That night, James found her outside, sitting on the steps, eyes closed, face lifted to the sky. "You look different," he said. "I feel different," she replied, lighter, like carrying the weight doesn't mean it owns me. They stayed 2 more days. When they returned home, she brought with her a stack of letters from women who had asked to stay in touch. Each one a thread, a reminder, a reason. Over the next few weeks, the house changed, not in structure but in spirit. Sam replaced the art on the walls with photographs she took herself. Mountain trails, fire pits, the old dining hall at the nonprofit. She started a blog, small at first, just essays and reflections. But the words spread. Veterans shared them. Organizations reached out. People began to listen. One evening, after posting an entry about Taylor, Sam received a message from Taylor's younger sister. "I never knew the full story." "Thank you," Sam cried then. James held her close, not to fix it, just to hold it all. Weeks passed, then months. The seasons shifted again. Summer came soft and slow. Sam's limp remained, but was less a burden now. She moved with purpose. She smiled more often. She danced once barefoot in the kitchen to a song from an old playlist. James watched her heart full, knowing he'd never seen anything braver. One night she found him on the back deck, staring at the stars. He looked at her and said, "I was wrong." About what she asked. "I thought love was something that came in grand gestures, that it needed perfect timing, but I was wrong. It's in the ordinary, in sitting with someone through their worst day, in making pancakes badly, in listening when there's nothing to say." Sam sat beside him, took his hand. "I didn't come here to find love," she said. "I came here to disappear, and you wouldn't let me. Because I saw you," he said, "even when you didn't want to be seen." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "You saved me, you know." He shook his head. "No, I just stayed. You saved yourself." Later that night, as they got ready for bed, she paused at the mirror. For the first time in years, she took off her shirt and didn't turn away from her reflection. The scars were there, jagged, deep, permanent. She ran her fingers over them, not with shame, but with recognition. Then she turned to James. "Do you still see her?" he asked. "Sometimes, in dreams, in quiet moments. But she doesn't hurt anymore. She just reminds me to live." He touched her hand. "Then live." And she did. In the days that followed, Sam launched a program through the nonprofit focused on women veterans with PTSD. They called it the Echo Room, a place where silence wasn't feared but honored. James helped build the website, donated the first round of funding. They worked side by side, not just as partners, but as people who had found a reason to keep moving. The house was no longer quiet. It was filled with music, with the sound of keys tapping, of meetings over tea, of healing. On the anniversary of Taylor's death, Sam held a candle on the back deck. James stood beside her. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The flame flickered gently. A life remembered. A future reclaimed. That night, as they sat by the fire, James looked at her and said, "You don't limp like you used to." She smiled. "I still limp, but it doesn't define how far I go." They clinked mugs, and for the first time in a long time, both believed fully in tomorrow. Autumn arrived with gold-tipped leaves and air that hinted at the past but didn't cling to it. The mountains glowed at dusk, and the house no longer felt like a shelter from the world, but a place where the world was finally allowed in. The Echo Room had expanded. Veterans came from across the state, some driving hours, just to sit in a circle of chairs, where no one had to explain themselves. Sam no longer introduced herself as a former medic or a discharged soldier. She said, "I'm Sam. I survived, and now I help others do the same." James watched her with quiet awe, not because she had transformed, but because she had returned to herself piece by piece, not polished, not fixed, but real. She still had bad nights. There were dreams that came without warning, days where her body ached in ways she didn't talk about, moments where silence felt too loud. But now she had names to call when it got too heavy. A team, a purpose, a love that didn't ask her to pretend. He had built tech companies, presented on global stages, earned more money than he knew how to spend, but none of it ever felt as valuable as the afternoons he spent setting up folding chairs in the Echo Room or printing flyers for Sam's next workshop. Their routines were simple, mornings with coffee walks, when her leg allowed shared dinners that weren't about cuisine, but company. They read together, sometimes in silence, sometimes aloud. On Sundays, they drove into town to volunteer at a food pantry where no one cared about past titles or medals, just hands helping hands. On one of those mornings, while packing canned goods into boxes, a young volunteer asked James how long he and Sam had been married. He laughed at first, then looked at Sam, who raised an eyebrow. "We're not," he said. "Not yet, but maybe someday." Sam smirked, "Maybe sooner than that." And just like that, it was settled. Not with a proposal or a ring, but with the same quiet courage that had rebuilt their lives. They didn't throw a wedding, they hosted a gathering in the backyard, folded chairs, handmade vows. A handful of guests, mostly veterans, a few neighbors, one old lawyer friend who cried more than anyone expected. Sam wore a simple dress, her boots underneath. Her limp was visible. Her scars were not hidden. James wore the same suit he had worn to his wife's memorial years ago, the one he never thought he'd wear again. But this time the tie felt lighter. The ceremony was short. Their vows were longer. They promised not perfection, but presence, not forever, but every day they were given. Afterward, they danced under string lights while someone played guitar. Not beautifully, but with heart. Sam leaned her head on James's shoulder and whispered, "I never thought I'd have something like this." James replied, "I never thought I'd want something like this again. But I do, and I do." That night they sat by the fire pit long after the others had gone home, holding hands in the soft dark. The stars above them felt closer somehow. Sam looked at the flame and said, "I used to think healing meant erasing the past. Now I know it means growing strong enough to carry it without falling." James kissed her temple. "You carry it well. You carry me too." She smiled. "And you let me. That's what matters." In the quiet that followed, the world felt still, not in the way that hurt, but in the way that heals. Two lives once shattered, now rebuilt, not by forgetting, but by choosing each other, every day, every scar, every step, together.